Okay, you're looking here at the Fortified Church of Chestnut. This is their little Rescue America Ministries. And I'll close up here. You bear with me just a minute. I want to continue on study of Daniel. The curtain caught my hair a little bit, so you just have to look over that. Daniel, I think we got to verse 11. I went through, so we'll pick up verse 11 of first chapter of Daniel. And we talked already, if you checked out the other videos that we've done up to this point. And God had brought Daniel and his friends to Babylon, and there they were to be prepared to serve in the king's, I guess you'd call it cabinet, but in his administration at some level, and depending on how they did. And now we see that they're being challenged to do something they was against their religion, being devout Jews. Let's pick up and let me go ahead and get started in verse 11. It says, "Then said Daniel to Melzar," and we'll see what happened. They'd come and told them they were going to have to eat the king's food, and that it was supposed to be the best for them, and they were supposed to be appear before the king. I think it was in 3 years, and they would be evaluated. And if for some reason they didn't pass muster, not only were they in danger, but Melzar, the fellow that's put over them, would be in danger also, because he's responsible. And so we see here, it says, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. And then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So we'll see here that this Melzar is probably, can't prove it, but it's probably more likely a title instead of a name. Daniel's first request was to the prince of the eunuchs. And now he's making his request to this Melzar, who was under the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 3 through 13 involves 2 and maybe 3 different people who were over the eunuchs. Verse 3 described Ashpenaz as master of the eunuchs. Verse 7 uses the word prince of the eunuchs and is a different word in the original language from master. And then this Melzar is described as someone who the prince put in charge of Daniel and his friends. Now, some translations translate the master and prince to the same word as if Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, and the prince of the eunuchs are the same person. But why would 2 different words be used in the original language if they were denoting the same person, or the same official? Of course, this is just my opinion. Everybody's got one, as they say. But I personally think there are 3 levels of officials between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and his friends, which would be Ashpenaz, who reported directly to the king. Then under him would be the prince of the eunuchs, who answered to Ashpenaz. That would be at the lower end. And he would answer to Ashpenaz, who would then answer to the king. And then the person in verse 11, who it appears the prince of the eunuchs, put specifically in charge of Daniel and his friends. We'll see then, after this, now, Daniel and his friends could have done a lot of things. They could have protested and kicked and screamed and said, we're not eating, whatever they wanted to do. Of course, they'd probably been put to death, but it's not like demonstrating today, and especially not in the king's court here. Nebuchadnezzar had a reputation of being very cruel and wicked king. And But it says that Daniel and his friends were promoted and they were preserved. So you'll see that. Now, verses 17 through 21. And as I said earlier, as we started this series, I'm not going to read. I enjoy doing verse by verse, don't get me wrong, but I decided it takes so long to get through this, and so I'm going to try to hit the highlights and not read every verse unless it's pertinent to the translation and getting a proper context, because I am very concerned about proper context. And so if it's going to require all the verses to be read to get that context, I'll do that. But we'll see that in verse 17, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And then in verse 21, it says, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. That would be King Cyrus, the king of Persia, as we see in Second Chronicles 36, verses 22 and 23. Now, let's go ahead and look at this right quick. If Daniel was 15 years old, and we don't know for sure how old he was, but just say if he was 15 years old when taken captive in 605 BC, he would have been 81 years old when Cyrus began to reign in his reign in 80 and 83 when he received the revelations in chapters 10 and 12 in the book of Daniel that he wrote. The Lord's put some of his servants in special places of responsibility sometimes. Responsibility and influence. And a lot of people, I hear a lot of people today criticizing people because they work for so-and-so, or they work for this certain business. And don't get me wrong, there are some places that a Christian has no business working. But if it's just some cases because of a corporate stance or things like that, and a person has to have a job, requires them to do some things. I personally had to work in a federal, not federal, but state prison for a number of years. That was kind of my Brook Cherith. Like Elijah, had to spend 3 years down by that brook and basically in hiding from Ahab and Jezebel before God brought him out to meet him on Mount Carmel. Mine was quite a bit longer than that. I was a lot harder cased. God had to get through to teach me, I guess. But that's what kind of the way I see that 11 years there. That's, several times I'm asking, Lord, what am I doing down here? Why am I here? But when the economy went bad in the early part of early 2000s, and I found it necessary to go to work. I've worked in prison ministry, and found myself going to work in a prison then, and a closed custody prison at that, which would be the equivalent of a maximum prison on the federal level. But at any rate, I asked myself the question that a few times, but I resolved that, God had me there for whatever reason, and that I would do my best to live for Him and serve Him. It was very difficult, but do the best I could with it. And people could criticize that. I had to miss every other Sunday of church services because I had to work every other Sunday. That was difficult, and it did have some effect on me. But thank God He was with me and helped me through it, and retired after 11 years. And it's been, I can look back and see some blessings out of that now. But at any rate, we see people that are put in positions that they work, and we may criticize them. How can you work at that place? How can you work for that person, as wicked as they are? And one thing and another. Well, sometimes God puts His people in places like that to be a witness, because we're certainly not going to volunteer usually to go to a place like that to witness, to reach those that we may not reach any other way. But we'll see that, look at Joseph. He was in Pharaoh's cabinet. Well, Pharaoh was a heathen. He was no Christian. Of course, he wasn't no Christian per se back then, but he wasn't a godly man. He's a wicked pagan. And here Joseph ends up serving in his cabinet. Esther in the palace of Ahasuerus, where Mordecai in turn was able to be an influence on Esther. Then Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer in Susa, there again under a wicked king. Paul was able to witness to the household of Caesar, and some think maybe even to Caesar himself. Philippians 4:22 said that all saints salute you, chiefly they that are, and this was Paul writing to the Philippians, chiefly they that are of Caesar's household. So if he didn't minister to and didn't get a chance to witness to Caesar himself, he did get a chance to witness to many in Caesar's household there, as he was a prisoner in Rome. And the bottom line is that we just need to be an influence for Christ wherever we're at. Wherever God puts us, that's where we need to be the influence at. And we'll see here in 2 Chronicles 36, it talks about that first year of Cyrus, that the word of the Lord accomplished there. And we may or may not get into that. But let me just take a little leniency here. And let me back up. There was something I saw a while ago that I wanted to mention. In Daniel 1:17, verse 17, it says this, for these 4 children God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And I meant to say, talk about that in just a few minutes. And so let's finish up with that. If God's given you intelligence, if He's given you knowledge and learning and skills, you really don't have any reason to be proud about it. You can be thankful and should be, absolutely. And if you call that pride, well, that type of pride is okay, but that's really not pride. But if you're really proud and think yourself so highly above everybody else just because you're blessed with the skills and a lot of knowledge, and don't my goodness, don't look down on everybody else who doesn't have your level of education. I've experienced that a little bit. I've spent the 5.5 years as area director of Western North Carolina for Prison Fellowship Ministries. And one of the reasons that I was able to get that job, it wasn't something I sought after. Matter of fact, somebody told me I was doing some volunteer training for them. And a friend of mine said, well, you'll probably end up working for them one of these days. And I thought, well, that's preposterous, as I've thought a lot of things were that God has allowed me to do. But I said, that's a volunteer organization. They've probably only got a handful of staff in the whole state, which was true. Turned out to be true. I think I had a state director and I think 3 maybe area directors at the time, 3 or 4, and then secretaries for them. And that was staff for all of North Carolina. And I just looked at him like he was half crazy maybe. And I said, no, they're a volunteer organization. There's no way that I'll ever end up working for them. Well, it was only about a month and a half, 2 months or something like that till I got a call. And the area director had got me in, had said he was leaving, and they'd asked him to recommend someone, and he wouldn't know if he could recommend me. He said, there's a lot of other people, and I knew there were a lot more qualified people than me. He didn't put it that way, but I know that's what he was saying, and I knew that too. For that position, they said they needed somebody that was from the area, because Western North Carolina is one of those areas that if you're not from there, then you have a hard time relating. And so I took the job, and sometime later that I got to meet some pretty well-to-do people, people that personally knew Chuck Colson, and some people had donated large sums of money to the ministry and to Chuck for the ministry. And they even asked me to spend the night at their house as I was doing some training in their area one time. Well, I guess they got to know me good enough that they contacted Chuck and told him that they thought that he should get rid of me. I just wasn't sophisticated enough these people. And but thank goodness Chuck did not listen to them. And so I was able to stay. The average stay of a director at that time was 2 years. And matter of fact, I had an 18-month guaranteed position because they'd got a grant to allow me to stay that long. And I said, well, either God's got something else for me after that 18 months, or He'll extend it some way. And sure enough, at the end of that 18 months, the people who had given the grant and gave another 18-month grant. And so in essence, I ended up staying 5.5 years. And it was a wonderful time for a wonderful organization that I cherish, and people that I was able to meet during that time, with the exception of a few. But yeah, some people are they let their education, they let their money and things go to their head, and just think they're above everybody else. And right quick, I worked on that prison, and I saw some of the younger officers because I worked on the mental health unit. Now, the mental health unit I worked on was what used to be called at one time when I was growing up. They called it the criminally insane, I think is the way they described it. And so these were very dangerous people. Could be they'd committed some very heinous crimes, but they weren't quite in the right mind. Some of them just had trouble functioning sometimes. They're all different levels. But we had a few younger officers that just had no patience with them. And you had to have a little bit of patience. Now, sometimes patience to wear thin. They knew how to do that. But some just had no patience. And we were talking one evening, and I just listened to it so much. Officers complain about them, tell me how dumb they were. And I just, I said, well, and sometimes I'm very blunt. I said, well, you just need to understand. I said, and stop and think, what it'd be like, it's not their fault if they were born with half the brain capacity or whatever. I mean, stop and think if you were like that. And I said, oh, wait a minute, that's, you're already there. So, of course, they kind of took issue a little bit with that, but he knew I was kind of half joking, but yeah, I was half serious. But just don't let the gifts that you've got, it's given by God, whatever you have, and whatever level of expertise you have, then it says here that God gave them knowledge and skill. We may have to work at it to hone it some, but God's the giver. And so don't be puffed up, don't be lifted up, don't talk down to everybody else like you know it all. We've got enough of that in America today. And in the world, really, where we have these elite that thinks that they were the ones that know how to everything should be done, and that we don't have capacity to govern ourselves. People, are not smart enough to vote and make decisions and things, so they think that they're the ones that have to do that. But my time's gone over than what I intended to. I'm trying to hold these in about 15 minutes. So, Dale Little, Rescue America Ministries.